middle age in that direction. I am one of the co-founders and the moderator, coordinator of the Austria-Czech Special Interest Group on JewishGen.
Very loose.
And therefore, the burden falls on me to give an update on what's new in Austrian and Czech Jewish genealogy. For those of you who aren't aware of my activities outside of JewishGen, I'm also on the board of governors of JewishGen. I am very actively involved in Genie.com. I'm a volunteer curator there and do a lot of work there. And we'll talk probably at the end a lot about what's going on Genie, which is really where most of the Austrian and Czech researchers are working right now, and it's why we're so successful. So without further ado, let's start and look a little bit about what's not new in Austrian and Czech genealogy. For those of you who haven't been to this conference before or haven't heard me speak on it before, I thought it would be useful to incorporate the new with also the existing resources that we have. And we are fortunate in Austrian and Czech genealogy to have probably the best documentation of any geographic group. I think we can safely say that, and certainly if there are comparable areas, they aren't exceeding what we have because we just have a great wealth of material, and we're very lucky that way. Okay, so one of the starting points for Austrian and Czech research is the JewishGen webpage, and we are a special interest group on JewishGen. We have our own webpage designed a long time ago, which has is a portal to a lot of different resources, both on JewishGen and off. So if you're interested in our area, I do recommend that you start here. You can join our special interest group by clicking, I think over the right, it says subscribe, and you can subscribe to our mailing list, which has, I think, about 2,000 members now, where people send messages nearly every day on various topics related to Austrian and Czech genealogy. So this is a very good starting point, and I recommend it. One of the things that we have on our webpage is a beginner's guide to Austrian Jewish genealogy, which I put together some years ago. It hasn't been updated too much recently, but most of the major resources are listed on there, and it's a very good starting point for both beginners and for those of us who always forget, where is that website? How do I access the Vienna Meldezettel and things like that most of us don't use very often? A lot of the resources are listed here, so please go there. We also have another website that I put together with Julius Müller, or another web page, all part of JewishGen, still called Getting Started with Czech Jewish Genealogy. Julius Müller is a genealogist in Prague, and we'll talk about some of his other work, but he and I put this together as a guide, sort of an introduction to the specific problems of Czech Jewish genealogy, which are different often. So JewishGen also has, this is the front page of JewishGen, the home page, and from here you can search for a town, you can search for surnames, you can access the databases at the top here by clicking these buttons. Oftentimes you can look for towns here. It's very useful because towns change names in our area. So I recommend starting there if you're really just starting out, or if you're looking for something in particular. We have among the databases on JewishGen an Austria-Czech database, and this is a growing collection of data related to our field, to Austrian and Czech Jewish genealogy. It's predominantly cemetery data, but it also includes other resources. So you can search specifically in the Austria-Czech section of JewishGen from this page, which you find under the database collection. One of the new things that we have in this database, Art Spira, who's here, put together a wonderful collection of all of the vital records of the town of Třebíč in Moravia. So he went through all the birth, marriage, and death records that are available, and we'll talk about where those are available later in the lecture. But he went through and made an index of all of them. So it's thousands and thousands of records, 9,440 records, and it's all searchable on on JewishGen. So it's a great way if you're looking for Trebich, or maybe you don't realize that you have relatives who were in Trebich or married in Trebich, you may find them using our database. As I said, cemeteries form a large portion of the data that we have in the Austro-Czech SIG database. We have all of the Vienna cemeteries, and we have quite a few also in the Czech Republic. So here's a list from Austria, and you see in Austria there are 36 cemeteries with 160,000 burials. Very useful, and it's useful for people not just with deep roots in Austria or the Czech Republic, but people from all over Central Europe came to Vienna and died there. So if you're a Galicianer and you think no one in your family went to Vienna, I have news for you. Someone in your family went to Vienna, and you'll probably find them in the cemetery database here. So even if you think you don't have a connection to this part of the world, you probably do. Vienna was, of course, a hub of Central Europe. This is an example of why you might want to use this particular database, because it also includes the occupation and address of the person that was with the burial records. You may not find that in other resources, which we'll talk about, which have the same database, but not all of these fields. So on to Czech Republic, or we have to now call it Czechia, because I think it was 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago, they decided to change their official name from the Czech Republic to Czechia. So we've not yet changed every instance or even any instance of this on our web pages. God knows if we'll ever do that, but I did it for this presentation. So that's new in our research. We have to use the name Czechia now if we want to use the current name. So on the JewishGen online worldwide burial registry, we have 118 Czech cemeteries with 74,838 burials. That is growing all the time, thanks in large part to the work of our guest this week from Bohemia, Fred Fatal, who is working on documenting, recording, indexing all of the Bohemian cemeteries. There are hundreds of them, and he's done several dozen, and he and others are contributing this data to this database on JewishGen. So again, it's a good place to look periodically as we continue to add cemetery records and indexes to the database. So here's Fred's website. His organization is called Tamus. It's based in Tachau, which is in southwestern Bohemia. And you can, if you're interested in a particular cemetery, they take donations, because it takes a lot of money and work to clean up the cemeteries, to photograph them, and then to go through the hard work of transcribing the tombstones and trying to figure out who these people are. It's very time-consuming, very difficult work that most of us are not qualified to do, so we're lucky that Fred is doing that. So again, if you're interested in a particular Bohemian cemetery, talk to Fred while he's here at the conference, or contact him at Tamus. And by the way, we can send funds to Tamus through JewishGen. So if you donate money, it's a charitable contribution in the United States, you can donate it to JewishGen, and JewishGen will pass it on to Tamus and help restore or transcribe the cemetery information. Okay. Another person working in the same field, but more in Moravia, is Jaroslav Achab-Heidler, who's an actor, a very theatrical person, but he's a fanatic about going to Jewish cemeteries and helping to transcribe and record tombstones. So he has his own website with 101 cemeteries. He's donated all of this to JewishGen, never asked for any money for it, and is a really terrific person, but is continuing to do this type of work. So it's another website where you can actually search. If you can figure out how to navigate the website, it's a little bit difficult, I have to say, but you can find a lot of interesting things, and you can even find tombstones and photos and transcriptions on his website. One other aspect of JewishGen, which I always recommend to people, is to use the JewishGen Family Finder. When you join JewishGen, you can enter in your family names that you're looking, your towns that you're looking for, and that's a great way for people to find you or for you to find other people. So here is an example for Trebich. There are 27 researchers looking for people in Trebich with 47 different family names. They may not all be different, they may overlap. But this is a great way of finding other people that are researching your particular town or family. Okay, so that's it for JewishGen. Let's look at the next resource, which is GenTeam. GenTeam is a website, a free website. You have to register, but it's free. Put together by a genealogist in Vienna named Felix Gundaker. And it has an enormous amount of resources. I only have one page in my presentation on it, but we can go through the list a little bit. They have all Viennese Jewish community records, so that means the birth, the death, the marriage, cemetery records. They have records for Burgenland, which is that area between Austria and Hungary, the 7 holy communities in there, like Eisenstadt. They even have Innsbruck and several Moravian communities that have been indexed, and the records are on GenTeam and available there. They have a fabulous resource, which we are really unique, I think, in all of the Jewish communities to have this great resource of newspaper obituary notices from Vienna, Prague, and Budapest. Those have been indexed. So people went, I'll get to where they come from in a minute, but they've been indexed, and the index you'll find on GenTeam. So you have to actually go to where they have the newspapers, and you have to select the newspaper, and you can search a name there, and you may find an obituary from a related family member, and they're very useful. We have an index of Georg Gaugusch's book. We talked about that a little earlier today. Wer einmal war, which is a massive tome, probably the best book of genealogy that I've ever seen, not just Jewish genealogy. It's half done, letter A through K, and other volumes are coming at the end of this year and hopefully next year to complete the alphabet. But the index you'll find on GenTeam, and it's a 2,000-page book, just the first half of it, all with very prominent Austrian Jewish families. All the names are indexed here on GenTeam. As I mentioned, the Vienna Jewish cemeteries, you'll find the indices here. You won't get the same information that we have on JewishGen. They don't have, I think, the occupation and street information in this database, so you might want to try both. We also have Georg Gaugusch put together, I think it was him, the Jewish Familians in Prague. He went through all of the Prague Familianten books and made an index so you could find people. So if you're researching Prague, you also want to go look in that. And then there's the index to the books by Anna Staudacher of conversions in Vienna, both Protestant and Catholic. You'll find the indices there. I have the books. If you're looking for someone in them, you can always email me, and I can look that up for you. But the index you'll find here on GenTeam. So this is a major resource for those of us in this field, and if you haven't visited there or visit there often, you're going to be very happy when you go there. Okay. One other database that has the cemetery data is the Jewish community in Vienna, or also known as the Israelitische Kultusgemeinde, or IKG, in Vienna. They have their own database in English or German. Here's the link for the English. And what's good about this database is that you can click on the grave number. It'll have the cemetery, usually in the Zentralfriedhof, which is the central cemetery. It's either T1, which is gate 1, or T4, where the 2 Jewish cemeteries. And then you'll have the group number, the row number, and the number of the grave. So you could try to find it. But what's really good is you click on that number of the grave, and you'll get everybody else buried in that grave. Be careful sometimes, because it'll give you everybody with the same group, row, and number, but sometimes it's a different cemetery. So sometimes you get thrown off because they'll have ones from T1 and ones from T4. But anyway, that's a very good way of finding unknown relatives, because you find one person, you see the whole grave, and you realize 3 or 4 or 5 people are buried in the same grave. So it's very nice. So from the GenTeam, I'm sorry? The row, I said group, row, and number. You can click on either one. You can also look by row. So from GenTeam, I mentioned these obituary notices. You can find them a link to them on GenTeam for the Viennese ones, for the Neue Freie Presse, for the Pester Lloyd, which is the Budapest newspaper. You just get the date of the issue, and you have to go and look it up on this website, which is from the Austrian National Library. It's called Anno, Austrian Newspapers Online, and it is an incredible collection of not just those newspapers, but every newspaper they've been able to recover, going back to as far back as the 1700s for that area in Austria. And they have them, they've used optical character recognition, so they are OCR'd, and you can do a full text search on all of these. So not only can you find the obituary notices, which are great, but if you have an unusual name, right, it won't work for Schwarz, because there's 700 million of them. But if you have an unusual name, you can sometimes find articles or notices about your family. So here, for example, Leopold Funk is my great-great-great-grandfather. You can see what the obituary notice looks like there. There are 4 of them in the paper on that page that day. But if you search Leopold Funk in the Anno website, you'll also see this debt collection notice that he was seeking money from, obviously, a relative, Hermann Funk, who had absconded and disappeared after borrowing some money, something I hadn't seen until I was preparing for this paper. So you'll find new things all the time if you use that full text search on Anno. It's a good resource. Okay, so very quickly, Peter Roel is a Canadian, originally from Czech Republic, who a while ago set up an enormous website with his own genealogy and 30,000 people on it. If you're connected to any of these families, he has a lot of information that he's linked up there. Most of his information has been moved over to genie.com, which we'll talk about later, which is a collaborative website, but this is his own website. It's a very good resource. To do that work, he put together here's the index page, 35,000 individuals, but he went through all these obituaries himself, not realizing that other people were doing it in Vienna, and he made his own index of them, and we have them on a website. This is on the Hugo Gold website. So we have these 10,000 obituary notices that he's collected. One of the unique things is that he titled each file with the names in the obituary, so not just the person who died, but the last names of everybody mentioned in the obituary. So this can sometimes be useful if you're looking for a very common name, but you know, let's say, a relative that has another name, right? So if you're looking for Adolf Kohn, right? And there are 50 obituaries of Adolf Kohn. You don't want to look through that, but you know that he was related to a Biedermann. You can search Kohn and Biedermann on this page, and you may find the right one. Or you may find things that are not in the index on GenTeam. So again, if you're looking for the needle in the haystack and you're looking at obituaries, this is a page that sometimes can help. Okay, out of Vienna and then back over to Prague. We're going to skip around a lot today. One of the great resources that we have is the Prague conscriptions database. These are basically a census type document for all of the households in Prague between 1850 and 1914. There are 2 million entries, so it's not just Jews, it's everybody living in Prague. Because Prague is a central capital city, you're going to find people not just from Prague, but from all over the place. Again, Galicianers should be looking there for their relatives as well. There are 2 different entry points. I like the one on the top better, but it's also down a lot and not working, and so sometimes you need to have the one on the bottom to access the records. And this is results, for example, for not such a common name, but obviously Jewish, Yontov, in my family, and it gives you there's 70 different entries for Yontovs, and this is what it looks like. So that's the original page there, and then the people who have transcribed, they're pretty accurate. You know, every once in a while there are mistranscriptions, so you have to sort of check it. But you'll find sometimes other information on here. Sometimes you'll have the death date. Sometimes over here, it's empty on this one, but you'll have information on marriages sometimes, and references to various permissions that they had to marry or or to move into the city. You might have the town of origin if they came from somewhere else. It might be listed on these, so it's very helpful if you have a relative who went to Prague and lived there in that time. Okay, some other Czech resources. Now, in conferences past, I brought a giant sort of, for debaters, we used to call them ox boxes, but a giant suitcase full of books that were printed in Prague of the various censuses, especially 1790, 94, 92, 84, etc. I actually injured my elbow very badly one year, I think, as a result of carrying that around. Thank goodness they finally put it online. So this may be relatively new for some of you. And so you have access to these. It's not easy to find it on the website. So I found this by going to news and then inventories from the main website. But these are PDFs. So they're giant. It's basically an entire book that you can then download and page through. It's organized by district. So again, you have to sort of know what you're looking for a little bit. It's not indexed. You can't search it that easily until you find the book that you're looking for, but here's what it looks like. So recently in the 1793 census, I was helping someone named Feigl, and I traced back to this Joachim Feigl with 10 living sons. That's a record. I haven't found anything more than that. 10 sons listed in 1793. I don't know if you can see that, but they're listed here. It actually gives the number, the order of the sons. It doesn't give their. Sometimes these records, these census records, will give the age, sometimes occupation. This one was remarkable just because of the number of sons. If anybody knows of more, let me know. So far, this is the record holder. So you can find a lot of really good information in this if you get back to 1793, and oftentimes. That's just, when Jews are formally adopting surnames, and so you come back to a small village and there's just one with your surname, right? And so that's your family. Sometimes there's two, and they're probably brothers, that type of thing. So it's very useful. Okay, so some other resources. This one is an old one I haven't visited in a while. You have to pay an annual fee to be able to get to it, but it is a website where they've collected the really old records from all the Jewish communities in Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia, or that Silesia part of the Czech Silesia. These are often records that are difficult to use because it'll say, the Jew fight, right? And maybe it's a list of people who paid taxes, right? So it'll say Jacob paid 3 florins, and Joseph paid 5, and the widow Sarah paid 3, okay? That type of thing. So, but if you're really interested in a particular town and you want to know everything about the Jews in that town, this is a resource. You have to contact them, pay a little money, and then you get access to these records. And here's a list. I mean, just to give you an idea, it's a lot of the towns they've done this for. And some of the records go far back, hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay, so I set up a website in honor of Hugo Gold a number of years ago. Hugo Gold was interested in Jewish history in Bohemia and Moravia and elsewhere. And he published in, I think it's 29 and 34, 2 huge volumes on the Jews of Bohemia and Moravia. And what he did is he collected articles from people in each community, usually. He wrote some himself, but mostly he farmed out. So in some places it's the rabbi of the community, and most of the history is about the religious people who live there. Sometimes it's the wealthy family he contacted, and they don't care about the religious side, so that's a footnote, and it's all about the business activity. But if you are interested in a particular town in Bohemia and Moravia, this is a good place to find it, and you can access these books on hugogold.com, but I've also added other source books for Austrian and Jewish genealogy here. So here, if you click on these, you'll get the whole PDF of, for example, the famous books on the inscriptions of the old cemetery in Vienna, which is like this thick. They've been scanned, and they're all available here if you want to page through them. And you can look there on hugogold.com. Logan Kleinwax, who's here at the conference, I haven't seen him yet, but I know he spoke early this morning. He has a website called Genealogy Indexer, and he very kindly has agreed to index these through his website. So if you search in the search field at the top of this, it'll take you over to Genealogy Indexer, and you may find something in these books that way. So he's very good at optical character recognition. So he's taken some of these old out-of-print books, he's run them through optical character recognition, and now you can do a full-text search on them, most of them. And so here's an example. If you type in Biederman, and you start getting all of these books that I have on this website, and you click on it and you get to the page. So that's very useful. Logan's resource is very, very useful. Here's an example of what you get from Taglicht. These are Viennese estate records. So it looks like this. And here's another one. Okay. If you're looking for that needle in a haystack and you haven't found it in other resources, you may have to look into a regional archive. And the regional archive in Opava has also some Jewish records which were attached to Catholic record books. So this happened, the only reason I know about it is it happened in my family. They lived in a small town in Moravia, didn't have its own Jewish records. So the two Jewish families who lived there, their births are all recorded in the back page of the Christian record book. So there's 300 pages of Christian records, and if you go to the very last page, you'll find the birth records for my family. And so, again, it's often difficult to find these. I believe on our JewishGen site, the Austria-Czech SIG site, there's something called the Gundaker list, that Felix Gundaker has a list of towns and where to find their records. So if it's not in the state archives, you might be able to find it that way, and he'll refer you to things like this. Okay, so the Holy Grail for us in Bohemian Moravia was the collection in the Czech state archives of records of all the Jewish communities in Bohemian Moravia. These were various sources. Sometimes they were not the original Jewish record books, but copies that were kept by the Catholic parishes, or even copies of those copies called control records. These were collected during World War II and brought to Prague and are in the Czech state archives. And for many years, you could only access them by going to Prague or hiring a researcher in Prague. But thanks to Lenka Matuskova, who's been our guest at various conferences in the past, she put these all online for us. So they were all scanned, and they're pretty much all available online, with the exception of more recent records that are covered by data protection laws, unfortunately, because they're trying to make sure that if there are any Holocaust survivors out there, that they never find their families. So that's why we need data protection for people born in the 20s. It drives me crazy, but that's the rule. So for anything other than that, you can find these record books, and the main repository is this website, badatelna.eu/fond, and 1073, that's the number of this particular group of records. There's an enormous list of, I don't know if I have the list here, yeah. So they have an enormous list of towns, and for each town you can open it up and you'll find what records there that they have. So you click on inventory and you get this list. Here's an example for Koyatin, which is in Moravia. N is for births, O for marriage, and Z for deaths. Sometimes they're index books, right? So these are all books for this little town in Moravia. And they're again, so I think I'll go back at the end to the place where you can download this whole PowerPoint if you want, okay? But this is at Badatelna. You can find this by going to the Austria-Czech SIG page and looking for what's new, or Beginner's Guide to Czech Genealogy, or also on Genie. I'll show you at the end where you can find a directory to this, because no one can remember where all these things are. That's why I do this every year. So you have these tremendous list of books. You could click on the book, and you get a list of the pages. I mean, you get little images of the pages, and you have to sort of cycle through until you get what you want. For the ones in Prague, sometimes there are 400 pages in a book. So you get better after you use it in guessing where the record you want is, where you have to go. So here's an example of what it looks like, though. So watch out. So, you find the Holy Grail, and it's written like this. So this is a birth record for one of my ancestors, Ursula Löwenthal, in 1790. But who knew you could find a birth record online of someone born in your family in 1790, in a Jewish family. So it's pretty neat that we have this. Here's an example of an index for Prague. So at the end, sometimes at the end of the books, there'll be an index for the book. This one's done by year, by letter, and then by year. Just to give you an example of what it looks like. So there's another, as I said, there are different sets of these books. There's the sort of original ones that are in that Fund 1073, and then in Fund 241, they have what they call the Jewish Control Registers. These are not all, but mostly around 1848 time period. They're mostly Bohemian, not as many Moravian ones. But if you don't find it in one, you can look in the other. And then the third group on Badatelna are these what's called the Familianten books. So those of you who have been doing this for a while know that there was a quota on the number of Jews in Bohemia and Moravia, starting in the early 1700s, and around 1810 or so, we have a book that still exists of all of the people who were permitted to have families. Okay, they were trying to have a quota on the number of Jewish families. You had to get a license to marry, which means that someone else had to die before you could actually get a license to marry and have a family, because they needed to have that quota. So those books where they kept track of who had the right to marry are online now. And as I mentioned, there's an index for the Prague ones on GenTeam. The other ones are harder to, I think they're not indexed yet, but if you know where you're looking for, you can find them, and then each book has its own index usually in the back. So you can look up the family name in the back, and it'll refer you to the page. So you have to know the district, sort of the state in Bohemia where it is. You have to know the town, but if you do know, you can find everybody with a particular surname that had a right to have a family in that region. And obviously it's a very good resource. Unfortunately, it doesn't list daughters, only sons. But often it'll list the wives, sometimes the mothers, sometimes the mother with the father's name, so you can sometimes get very lucky and get a lot of information out of these Familianten records. So Alex is in the back there. Alex Calzaret has, I don't know how he did it, but it's an amazing website that he set up a couple of years ago. Here's the address for it. It is a map of all of these registers, okay? All of the records that are available. So if you're looking for a town and you want to know what's available, you type over in the address field, like you're using Google Maps to drive somewhere, right? You just type in the name of the town, and it'll you can select it and then zoom in on the town, and it'll show you. He has a legend. Different colored dots mean different types of books. Will tell you if there's a book from that town. It can be very useful because sometimes you'll get a reference to a town where there isn't a book, right? Because your ancestor lived in a little village off the side of some other place that had a Jewish community. So all you find in your record as you go back is the town of whatever it is, okay? But there's no book for it. So you go to Alex's website and you see that 4 kilometers away is a town with a record book. So that's the town you want to look at, right, on Badatelna. So this is very useful if you find that you're going to a town that no one's ever heard of before.
because if you can find it on the map, you can find something nearby and maybe find something related to your family. So thank you, Alex, for putting that together. It's genius. Okay, so some other little goodies. A few years ago, received this file from the Prague Jewish Museum that they have yet to put on their website for whatever reason. There is a register of Jewish marriages in Bohemia from the 1700s. Look at the dates, 1730 to 1783. This is a time before, generally, the Jews had surnames. So it's really hard to use this, but it's done by town, and it'll say, Joseph, son of Isaac, right, marries Sarah. So it may or may not be useful. If you are in a town where there's only one Joseph and Sarah, now all of a sudden you know Joseph's father's name. If Sarah is from another village, it'll say where Sarah is from, and so now you know another town to look at. So it can be useful. I've had at least one success using it, but you'd have to be someone like Thomas Firet to really get a lot out of it. He happens to have a family that always has the perfect records. Yes, Ben, did you have something to add?
You go through the Familial town and cross-index the dates, and sometimes
Right.
like 30, 40% success with it. You can still alive and Familial.
Right, so the Familial records we talked about will have the date that they had permission to marry. It's not the wedding date, but it'll have the date of permission to marry. So sometimes you can go back to this, and if there's, again, right, Joseph's marrying Sarah, but the date's right, and they're the only Joseph, Sarah in the town, or maybe there are only two Josephs, but one's married Sarah and the other's married Katie, right? You can sometimes use this. It's only on this website up there. I put it up on my Dropbox, and that's a link to it. Yeah, Paul. The Hebrew name, people don't have surnames on here, so it's... Right, again, not easy to use this, but if you're looking for the needle in the haystack and you're lucky, yeah, Alex? It is on Monotona? Okay. It's on Monotona? Send me the link and I'll add that in. I didn't know that. Okay, good. That's good to know. Okay, getting out of that area, we're going to go to FamilySearch. So, okay, it's the Mormons. We love the Mormons in our group because they help us get our records. And a while ago, I made a sort of a shidduch, a marriage between the Mormons and the Jewish community in Vienna in a small window of opportunity, and the Vienna Jewish community allowed the Mormons to come in and scan all of their vital records with the condition that they be able to put some of them online, which they haven't done. But they've put some other, or they've had some of them online. They have other ones that they haven't put online. They have various copies at the Mormon Library. But you can find them on FamilySearch. So the Mormons have on FamilySearch some of the Viennese. I misspoke earlier. The Mormons had, let me back up. Before I did this with the Vienna Jewish community, the Mormons had copied the copies of the Jewish records in Vienna from the Austrian state archives. And those you could always get by microfilm from your local family history library. After they filmed the copy that the Jewish community have, they put those online. They haven't put the other ones online because their old agreement says they can't do that, but they have the ones from the Jewish community online, except if when they filmed it and they put 3 on a microfilm, one of those on the microfilm exceeds the data protection limit. So sometimes there are things missing on here. But I'll tell you how to get around that, maybe. Anyway, this is very useful. If you're looking for records in Vienna, you can actually see the records online here through FamilySearch. And so you'll see something like this from a marriage record. And it has terrific information. They're usually easier to read than those Czech ones. Okay. The index for this, by the way, that you would use is on GenTeam. So remember when I talked about GenTeam, they have the index for all of these records. So you look on GenTeam, it'll tell you where to find it. Then you can go to FamilySearch and actually find the record sometimes. They also have the Czech Census,
which I rarely use. I've used it a little bit, but they have, I think it's better now than it was last year and better than the year before because they have people going through and indexing these, and they're adding communities all the time. So it's now over 3 million images. This is obviously not just Jews, it's everybody living in the Czech lands, and they're putting them all online. So if you know where to look and you know how to find your way through FamilySearch, you can actually find records of your family. Yes? Yes, yeah, there's no index that I know of. Here's the district list, and you click on the district, and then you get a town list. My great-grandmother was born in Budweis, or České Budějovice, and so here's the image. And it's good because the Jewish records from that town are not good. They're either lost or incomplete, but you can find her in the census there. So it's another resource that we have. See, didn't I tell you we have the best resources of anywhere? Okay, here's another one. Is this one on Badatelna and I don't know about it? I don't know. These are scans of an index for one of the cemeteries in Prague. You're all familiar with the old cemetery in Prague with the tombstones that go like this. And you might have visited Prague and seen Franz Kafka's grave at the new cemetery in Prague, but there was one in between that covered late 1700s to around 1900, and it's been mostly destroyed. It was bombed a little bit, and then the communists leveled it in the 80s to build a giant park and radio tower. So unfortunately, a lot of information was lost, but there is an index that I have obtained, and I put again at that particular website, and it's really interesting actually. So this is an index, very hard to use sometimes. It'll have the Yiddish names, or the Jewish names for people, so not necessarily the ones that you're finding in the other records. It'll have the husband or the father, and sometimes only the Hebrew date, so you use a date converter. But often, if you're looking for a family in Prague where someone died in this period in the 19th century, you can find good information on the family through this that isn't available anywhere else. Okay, Julius Müller, I mentioned earlier, is a terrific researcher, genealogist, probably the best one now in Prague. And he has his own website called toledot.org, where he has a lot of really good information, including an index of the familians for each region. So if you know the town you're looking for, you can see all the names that are in the familiant books. He gives examples of rare types of records that you can find if you hire someone like Julius Müller, who knows how to go to the various local and regional archives and also work with the Jewish Museum archives and find things that you wouldn't find anywhere else. So for example, an index of that Jewish houses in Safov or Shafa. We have then another website. Sorry, there are a lot of them. This one is based in Brno. It's mainly about the Brno cemetery, but also some of the surrounding towns. Those cemeteries have been indexed. They're photographs. It's a little bit hard to use this, but if you're looking for families in these towns, you definitely should go to this website. I'm still exploring in it. Here's, for example, a grave. So they have a picture of the grave, where the location is, and whatever information they were able to glean from the gravestone. Okay, here's a new one. So there has to be something new in what's new in Austrian Czech genealogy. These have existed for a long time, but we haven't really had access to them. And I was able in Jerusalem last year to persuade the Yochai Ben Gedalia at the Central Archives for the History of the Jewish People to give me a copy of transcriptions by Pinkas Heinrich of the graves in the Währinger Friedhof in Vienna. So this is not the Zentralfriedhof, which has most of the graves in Vienna, but the earlier one in Währing. And what Pinkas Heinrich did was he transcribed the tombstones, and so you'll have information from the tombstone and then other biographical information that he was able to gather on the person. And again, I put that up at that site there. Okay, almost done. Holocaust.cz, for those of us who have relatives who were sent to Theresienstadt, this is your place. They are steadily going through their records and uploading documents, so they have a database of victims. I think it doesn't necessarily have people who survived, but victims, and often they'll have other documents, photographs and documents. Here's an example, Samuel Löwenberg, and you can click on each of those and download those and see those documents on this man who was unfortunately in Theresienstadt. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about Genie. In our field, and increasingly in others, we're using Genie to collaborate, which is what I recommend to everybody. Working together, we've been able to really make progress on our trees and basically tie them all together so that almost without fail, I can take someone from Bohemia, Moravia, and without much difficulty connect them and find out how I'm related to them in various different ways. So we have a website. This functions a little bit like the JewishGen website. It's a little easier for me to edit, so I have lots of links to the resources that we've been talking about, like the Badatelna pages, and there's pages on how to read the handwriting. There's a link to a page how to find the town if you have the German town name and you need the new Czech town name. So if you're lost and looking for something, look over here or look on the JewishGen site. It's a good directory of available information. And at the bottom of it are a list of communities. You can't see it on this, but we have a list of all of the Jewish communities in Bohemia and Moravia, and for most of those we've set up separate projects where we collect all of the information about that town. So you can upload documents and photographs, you can tag individual relatives to the project, and you can start to see a sort of a constellation, right? So not just your family, but the families they were related to living next door. If those of you who are watching the lecture by Tomas during our luncheon, right, you're seeing all these people are living right next to each other. You know, imagine you found your great-great-grandmother. Who went to the wedding? Who went to the bris, right? Who was at her sweet 16, if they have that type of thing there? It's all of these families living in the same town. So you all want to be working together, and Genie is the way to do that and to organize the information. So I really recommend people go there. If you have a problem with any of it, you can talk to me or any of the other curators we have here at the conference. But it's really a one-stop shop for finding information about your Bohemian and Moravian ancestors. Here's an example from the town of Koyetin. So there are a number of people collaborating on the project here. This is a list of different names, so different families that we've identified from this town, and each one you can click on the link and then see the whole family tree. So I'm going to be giving a talk tomorrow on how to do collaborative genealogy, and it's really what's very exciting here on Genie. We have also projects related not just to towns, but events and other things that bring people together, including the Holocaust. So we have a whole series of projects, one for each concentration camp, extermination camp, ghetto, DP camp, etc. So if your relative was sent to Theresienstadt, we've already collected 10,000 profiles. So each profile is connected to a family tree. It's not like going to Yad Vashem and you see one page and you don't know anything else about the family. Here you're going to find a person and you're going to be linked to a whole family tree, and you're going to be able to find a living person who added that person in so you can contact someone about it. So those of us who have relatives who unfortunately were in the Holocaust, which is most of us, go add them to these projects on Genie. It's a great way for people to combine their resources. Okay, so now the fun at the end. I always like to show how everybody's related to everybody else in our area here. So Susie Boyer, you're here, and Alex, I didn't know that you were fifth cousins twice removed, but you are. There you are. Vera, you're related to Ann Fuller that way, third cousin once removed, et cetera, et cetera. You can do this for any of us, and it doesn't have to be Austria-Czech, doesn't even have to be Jewish. On Genie, everybody is connected to everybody else. Here we have Paul King and Thomas Fiert, and the path between them. Liz and I, not too bad. Second cousin twice removed, husband's first cousin once removed. That's not that bad. That's right, okay? That's just two families, right? You can see by the different colors. See, it goes from blue to red, right? That's it, 2 families. Liz is related to Bob. Schumachers are related to David Sichel, right? Stephen Weil and Art Spira, a couple families away, and Karen Franklin and Alex Woodle. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we have time for questions. Behind. Yes, I'll go back to the PDF. Yes. Oh, there's a microphone up there if you want your question recorded. I'm going to go back to the page with the address where you can get this PDF, I hope. You never know. See, look at all the things we talked about. It's not bad. And some of it was new. A couple things, right? There we go. It's at the bottom there, that tiny URL. I didn't do a handout, so this is it. Okay, question back there, Paul. What? Okay, so what's in the pipeline is a good question. Lenka Matuskova has been working on and has promised that she's working on a database of death, declarations of death of people who didn't make it through the Holocaust. So after 1945, families had to come back to Prague, and in order to try to recover property, they had people declared dead. So she has collected this collection and has promised to put it online, but has not yet. But I'm hoping by the time we reconvene in Orlando next year that we'll have that, and that'll be very interesting for those of us looking for more recent relatives, people who were lost in the Holocaust. The other project that we talked about earlier this morning is the idea of taking this information on Badatelna and getting it indexed, like Art Spira has done in Trebic. If we had all of these books indexed and on JewishGen or on GenTeam or some other repository, it would be really helpful because people moved around. You're sometimes not looking in the right books, and if you could just search by surname and find everybody with a particular surname in Moravia or Bohemia, it would obviously be a lot easier for us. But that's something that has so far been beyond the abilities of our group, except for individual projects like Art. Art, if you want to say something about that, you certainly can. Use the microphone, Art. It's worth it because Art really did an amazing job at working through the Trebic records. It's not easy.
There were about 9,000 records for Trebic, which isn't, I don't say that to brag or to discourage you from indexing towns that are of interest to you. There are many much smaller towns in which this would be very useful. I'd like to say what you can get out of it as a researcher. If you have a genealogy program such as Reunion, and you can and you enter the data from these indices on that program, you can then do searches according to very many different criteria. So you can determine the number of babies that were born between 1820 and 1830, and then look at the death rates in those same years, the death records, and determine what the mortality rate was amongst babies. You can look up, you can categorize them by cause of death. You can look at population statistics for that time, all as a result of having entered the information in the index. A negative thing about it, and we attempted to link the names in the register that were placed on JewishGen, is that the links change every time Badatelna shuts down and reorganizes their system, and you find that the links no longer work. But you still have the information about the page in the records, the folio page, in which you can find specific records.
Whoops, I realize now I have the wrong picture on the top from Salt Lake. You know, it looks so beautiful, I forgot to change it to Seattle. Sorry about that. Thank you, Art, for that. It really is a remarkable resource that you put together. I wanted to add one more thing. For those, back to Vienna a little bit, a lot of the references you'll find on GenTeam to indices and books refer to records that are not available on FamilySearch yet. And I have a copy of all the records. So if you're looking for something and it says it's in a book for another district, not the main central district in Vienna, but Mariahilf or Josefhof or whatever it is, the Josefstadt, there are about 24 different books that are not on FamilySearch. You can write to me and I can help you look those up, or you can write to the Jewish community in Vienna. But those are not yet all available online. I'm hoping one day they will be, but they're not yet all available online. But I can help people find things if they need it. Any other questions? We're so lucky. I mean, I don't know of any other area that has this much available, and we're just so very fortunate in the last 10 years or so to have a lot of it come online so that we can all work from our homes and really make a lot of progress. Yes, Paul? Yes, I have. So the book Paul's talking about the expulsion from Prague in the 1740s when they returned. Everybody had to fill out a little declaration, and so we have a book of those. I have it with me here. It's not online as far as I know, unless Alex, you found it somewhere. There's some things that are not yet online, and I'm not sure why. That page that has all of the PDFs of the census, there's some that are there and some that I can't find. I'm not sure why there isn't a full text index of it. There's only so much that we can do, and I guess only so much that the workers in the Czech area are doing to make these things available. But we're still very lucky that we have what we have, and for those of you who have been working so hard putting families together on Genie, I really want to thank all of you also for making all of our lives much better. Thank you very much.